Welcome to Divcasts from University of Chicago Divinity School. For more of our podcasts and information about our terms of use, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts.
Hello everybody, welcome to today's Wednesday lunch here at the Divinity School. I'm Karen White, I'm the Director of Communications here and the organizer of this series, so it's a pleasure to welcome you today to our programs. Before we get started, I want to do our usual housekeeping. Our head chef for today was Blair, and Blair and the crew prepared this entire meal from scratch. So, we do ask that you clean up after yourselves. So the plate can go into the compost, right? So the plate and your leftovers can go into the compost in the back of the room, and any garbage into the garbage, and your silverware into the yellow soapy bags. Do we have any community announcements? Yes, Claire.
Women's Caucus this Friday is having the Valentine's Day party. So female members and friends of the Divinity School are welcome to join us at 1:30 in Swift 201.
Is there food?
Yes, there is food.
Yeah.
Hey, Hank and Apple, DeGruyter for Religion and Philosophy of the Library. Those graduate students in the room, you will have received an email from the library cordially inviting you to complete a survey about your experience at the library. And I would just like to encourage you to do so and encourage your friends to do so, to do it at parties. It makes a difference, okay? You really read them, and it makes a difference. So this is, you can make some real difference with how the library addresses your issues. You could also just email all that stuff to me too.
Tomorrow at noon, right here in the common room, the Craft of Teaching program is having its flagship event for the quarterly Dean's Seminar with a distinguished alum of the Divinity School. Tomorrow it's Chancellor Rebecca Chop, Chancellor of Denver University, and former president of my own Swarthmore College, so I'm certainly looking forward to it. That'll be here noon to 2. There are lunches. There may be 1 or 2 still available, but most people have RSVP'd for it. No need to RSVP at this point, just show up, and it should be a really great event. On Monday, the Craft of Teaching's next event will be with our own Kneffel on teaching the undergraduate research paper, and that will be more of a practicum. Doesn't it correspond with our arts of? It's part of our Arts of Teaching series, emphasizing skill development and teaching practice. And in this case, using the research paper as a pedagogical tool. And so that will be Monday in Swift 201, also at noon.
For those interested, next week the first candidate for the New Testament Early Christian for the New Testament Early Christian Literature position will be here at ISD Plus on Monday evening at 4:30. He'll be giving a public lecture in the common room, and then the next morning on Tuesday there'll be a breakfast with him at 9 o'clock, and then at noon there'll be a workshop where he workshops a paper with us. So we'd like to get as many people as possible to come to those events. So if you're at all interested, please do come.
And Michael. If none of these events sound familiar to you, it's because you're not on the Active Divinity School email list. So I can add you to this meeting afterwards. So this is, we still have 1, 2, 3 lunches to go in the quarter. Just super quickly, next week is our Dean's Forum lunch with Professor Anthony Yu on the new edition of the Journey to the West. If you didn't look yet on the university's homepage or our homepage, there was just a great story by the news office on it, and it's going to be a good one, so if you haven't signed up, do that. The week after that, we have the Enhancing Life team. And the week after that, we're having Martha Bain, who's the founder of Soup and Bread in Chicago. So we're going to have some soup and bread, and we're going to hear from Martha speaking about Soup and Bread, which is basically it's a fundraising program that deals with soup and bread. So we'll hear more about that. So I'm really happy to be able to introduce today's guest, who is actually an alum of the Div School. Our guest for today is Stephen Danielson. Got his Ph.D. here in '06, and he's Associate Professor of Religion at Cornell College, and he's the author of Midrash and Multiplicity. I also want to welcome his students who are here for a month of studying. So this whole table is undergraduates from Cornell College. Look at them. Yeah. They'll be here next week too, so you can embarrass them again then. So Steve is going to speak on angels and exegesis, Israel and other secondary powers in rabbinic literature. The ladies join me in welcoming Dr.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking Ann and Taryn for this last-minute invitation. and for those of you who are not so Hebrew inclined, I'll try and go easy on you, although the tradition that I'll be dealing with is up there on the screen. Hopefully you'll pay attention to me, and then I'll read from the tradition. So as indicated in the title of my talk, which is Angels and Exegesis, I'd like to speak briefly about rabbinic views about angels with an eye towards Israel's relationship with these heavenly beings and what this relationship can tell us about the theological development of rabbinic Judaism from its origins, alongside Christianity in late post-biblical Judaism. My research on this topic both corresponds and responds to the burgeoning interest in angels among scholars of early post-biblical Judaism, who have seen the importance of angels in this period, on the one hand, as a source for the development of the rabbinic restriction of angelic powers in the two powers in heaven heresy, and on the other, as an explanation of the origins of early Christology, for which, and I quote Larry Hurtado, principal angel speculation provided the earliest Christians with a basic scheme for accommodating the resurrected Christ next to God without having to depart from their monotheistic tradition. As such, the impact of angels upon our understanding of post-biblical Judaism has been most forcefully proposed by Daniel Boyarin, who argues that the angelic interests of dualistic circles of Jews and early Christians was a key factor in the creation of Trinitarian Christianity and the one-power theology of rabbinic Judaism reflected in the two-power in heaven heresy. In this view, whereas Christianity embraced and expanded the angelic powers of the post-biblical period, rabbinic Judaism, by virtue of its objection to this heresy, built a theological firewall against the brazen post-biblical angelic traditions of apocryphal works, such as Enoch, the so-called high Christology represented in the Gospel of John, and in Hechalot literature, all of which blurred boundaries among divine, human, and angelic identities and roles. Consequently, scholars have argued that among post-biblical Jewish traditions, Rabbinic Judaism was the most conservative regarding its views of angels, seeking to domesticate these traditions and subsume traditions which propose less distinct boundaries among divine, human, and angelic roles to what is, and in my opinion, mistakenly, the primarily legal, ethical, and especially exegetical scholastic project of the rabbis. And I'm quoting somebody else. Not me, right? So it's in the example of Israel, both patriarch and nation, however, that we see there's far more that can be said about the theological value of angels in rabbinic literature and its relationship with these other earlier contemporary movements. As my role here is purely introductory, I'll limit myself to indicating how complex the rabbinic tradition regarding God, Israel, and angels may be, with the assistance of one of the most exemplary passages. This is also a very, very famous passage that anybody who has familiarity with Midrash really would know immediately, which is the tradition of Jacob's face or icon on the divine throne. This is from Genesis Rabbah 68:12, and it's also found in an alternate version in the Talmud, Chulin 91b, which is all anchored on the ambiguities in the language of Jacob's dream in Genesis 28. And so you can see in the tradition here, and for those passages that need the Hebrew, I've kind of put the Hebrew in, and it goes as follows, moving from Genesis 28:12, and he dreamed, and behold, the ladder was set up upon the earth, and its head, Rosho, it could be his head, meaning the ladder, or in this case it could be Jacob, reached the heavens, and behold, angels of God ascending and descending upon it, him. Okay, Malchei Elohim Olim V'Yordim Bo. Rabbi Chia, Rabbah, and Rabbi Yanai disagreed on whether this word bo, which means on it or on him, refers to the ladder or Jacob. For the one who wishes to say that the angels were ascending and descending upon Jacob, they were raising him up, bringing him down, glorifying him, and abusing him. This is a very ambiguous phrase. As Scripture says, Israel, I'm glorified by means of you. They said, you are he that your face is engraved above. Ikonin, okay, and this is the key word, like icon, right? Shalcha chakuka lamalan. When the angels would ascend, they were seeing his face, and when they would descend, they saw him asleep. A parable, to what may the matter be compared, to a king that sits and judges in a court. When his subjects ascend to the basilica, they find him asleep, and when they descend to the court, they find him sitting and judging. This tradition of the patriarch's icon on the divine throne, in its apparent opposition between higher and lower halves of Jacob, seems to suggest the difference between an ideal and lesser form, offering a symbol or literary device that points from the actual to the ideal vision of humanity in general, or the nation of Israel in particular. For some, the bifurcation of Jacob in this Midrash reveals a Gnostic vision, representing the nation of Israel's heavenly archetype, that recalls the primordial man Adam's likeness, icona, with God in Septuagint to Genesis 1:27, and which stands in contrast with the lower sleeping Jacob, who represents the sinful and mortal distance of the nation from its original divine nature. The inclusion of the angels as prosecutors of the patriarch, most clearly articulated in the version from Chulin in the Talmud, in which the angels wish to injure Jacob, also points for some to a rivalry between the nation and angels for intimacy with God. In some, the simple symbolic value of the tradition, as understood by scholars, not me, is best summarized in the comments of Louis Ginsburg, who explained the duplication of Jacob with the comment, this is a quote, Jacob would have been the ideal countenance not for Adam or for mankind in general, but for the people of Israel in particular. His icon would have perfectly represented Israel's presence upon God's throne. Indeed, the desire to situate a figurative representation of Israel upon the divine throne is itself a sufficient motive to explain the invention of the image of the icon. Israel's wish to be literally at God's right hand. A greater complexity in the relationship among patriarch, nation, and angels is apparent, however, if we consider this tradition within the context of one of the great mysteries and constants of rabbinic and non-rabbinic literature. The idea that the patriarch Jacob is split into many, and not just two, personalities or manifestations. The two Jacobs of Genesis Rabbah originated not only in the theological aspirations of the nation attached to the word bo, or on him, but in the multiplications, contradictions, and ambiguities in pronouns and prepositions in Genesis 28, the ambiguity of the identities of the angelic and human wrestlers in the patriarchs' renamings as Israel in Genesis 32 and Hosea 12, and second giving of the name Israel in Genesis 35. With regard to this latter example, Genesis 32:29 and 35:10 assume that a nominal, if not metaphysical, transformation occurs in the patriarch when he transitions from his old name Jacob to his new name Israel. But, as Moshe Tzvi Siegel indicated in the 1930s, Genesis does not provide any clarity about who and what are Jacob and Israel, even after the change of names. A fact nowhere better represented than in Genesis 46:2, in which God delivers the fate of the nation Israel to the patriarch Jacob Israel with the following preface. And God spoke unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. That Jacob is never decisively transformed or wholly reconciled with his new identity as Israel in Scripture is no doubt the cause of the deliberate or accidental confusion and multiplication of identities that continue into the post-biblical period. Post-biblical literature's fragmentation of Jacob and Israel is a constant, shifting among individual, duplicate, or multiple personalities which commingle and interact with one another as humans, angels, a nation, or any combination of above. As can be seen in the interpretation of these passages and the mixing of angelic and human personae in apocryphal works, the Prayer of Joseph, the Ladder of Jacob, Philo, the Gnostic treatise on the origin of the world, the Church Father Jerome, and in para-rabbinic works, the Piyutim, Targumim, and Halot literature. These post-biblical literatures introduce, elide, combine, and reconfigure these different manifestations of Israel according to their theological visions of divine, human, patriarchal, national, and angelic relationships. The rabbinic attempts in my example from Genesis, Rabbah, and Hulin are no different than these other traditions so well recognized for their dualistic views of angels. In my example, Jacob is doubled, not because the sages wish to use Jacob as a metaphor or symbol, but rather because they see plurality as a characteristic feature of Jacob in Scripture, which grows, multiplies, and develops in concert with these parallel post-biblical attempts to address the theological diversity, national identity, and competing movements of their time. It's not for naught, then, that we can point to similar angelic or divine ambiguities in rabbinic literature regarding the human and divine qualities of Jacob and Israel. Just in speaking about Genesis Rabbah alone, not only is a visage on the divine throne, but he also is a member of the Merkavah, or the divine throne. He is a god who is, or an El, who's like Yushrun, and as a concealed immortal, just to name a few. Whereas scholarship has noted the radical angelic culture of other post-biblical literatures in opposition to the prosaic ideas of rabbinic literature, we must admit the existence of such radical ideas in rabbinic literature and ask why. If we can accept that the fluidity of Israel's human, national, and angelic identities in the Midrash is part of a larger conversation in post-biblical literature, then the Jacobs of Genesis, Rabbah, and Hulin are not simply projected heavenward in order to represent symbolic and ideal forms of humanity or the nation of Israel. Rather, Israel is one of the means for rabbinic Judaism to engage the rise of Christianity and other forms of post-biblical Judaism who similarly wrestled with the role and meaning of angelic powers. The end. Tangent.
We have time for questions.
Yeah. All right.
I was wondering if there's ever any association of the face of Jacob on the throne with seeing the face of the deity in the temple.
You're talking about like
going like in was it Deuteronomy 16 and Exodus 23 where during festivals you come to see my face, but then of course it's transformed.
Not in rabbinic literature. No, not in rabbinic literature. No, there's no association of that kind. No.
Leonard, follow up with a different question.
Okay, good.
So why do you think it is that people are so hesitant to see these traditions in rabbinic literature?
Because they are hung up on the two-power in heaven heresy. Mm-hmm. And the point is I mean, I think it's a little bit too clean the way some of the ways they've described the parting of the ways, which wasn't a parting of the ways, yeah. Which is the way that they're putting it right now, which is essentially, and Boyarin is probably the most extreme in this way, where we can say essentially what was norm was two, right? So like a primary, God and a secondary power. Mm-hmm. Okay, and this is straight out of Hurtado, mm-hmm. Right? And then, how did how did Christianity and Judaism differentiate themselves from these movements? One went 3 and one went 1, and 2 became heresy, right?
Look, it's easy.
Yeah, it's a little bit too clean. It's a little bit too clean. And the thing is also, I think that there's a tendency to want, there's a long history, and I'm sure like going back to, Heskel Kaufman and Auerbach and all these people, they don't want to see, Judaism is especially Rabbinic Judaism is a monotheistic tradition, period. Right? And any inference that, even with those who are interested, like Peter Schaefer and Boyarin, in saying that, Rabbinic Judaism is part and parcel, they never go, the angels never really infringe on divine roles and responsibilities in the way that they would, like, and for example, in the Book of John or in Hebrews or what have you, for Jesus or for other kind of, Enoch, certainly in the Book of Enoch. But, I think that absolutely, if you go through the kind of list of features such as creation or salvation or, all these kinds of things which have to do with, accepting prayer, which is the mutation that Hurtado speaks about, then, we can find some strange things also, but Midrash is Midrash. It's just, you have to really, really see what they're doing and read for me, as I was taught by, Dr. Foster upstairs, it's the way that they're reading verses is very concrete. And they read them, and that's why this is the most obvious kind of one, but I have some really, I've got a lot of nice traditions in my pocket. Yes, sir.
What is the status nowadays of H. Wheeler Robinson's idea of the corporate personality of biblical poetry? And this is kind of interesting because I never thought of this kind of Midrash as being a possible example of that too, as biblical poet, like in Isaiah 53, where the suffering servant represents the people and the prophet and so on. I don't know in this politically correct world, I'm not sure what status Robinson has, but a lot of the early polemics between Judaism and Christianity were in fact divergence on that biblical poetic device of the one representing the many, the prophet or the suffering servant representing Israel, and so on. So this, it would seem to me, studying this in that light might be helpful if it's still considered correct to do that.
I can't speak to the reception of that particular scholar, but I can say that this is a little bit more of a roundabout way of dealing with that. It's well and good to say that this part of the point is that this doesn't necessarily, like, one for one represent Israel. It's a little bit the nation or being corporate in any way. This is part of the problem which we deal with, is that it is so fragmented that it is difficult to, even in the Bible, it's difficult to know what they're talking about when they use these terms, Israel or Jacob or what have you, right? When you get into the Midrash, sometimes there's kind of an intentional blurring. And so it is, certainly, is there a national aspect to it? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I would say that it has, that has to do with the particular way that they're engaging their contemporaries and the theological language of their contemporaries. That would be that's my kind of take on it. And? No. No. Thank you, everybody. Was there another? Oh, did you have one? No, I'm so sorry.
So we can't speak of the nation of Jacob then, or?
Well, of course you can. Who's we? Who are we?
Yes.
Okay. We can do everything. All right. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
We thank you for listening to or viewing our podcast. For more information and for other podcasts, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts. Copyright, the University of Chicago Divinity School.